and judged them by their acts, and their differences could be measured in motes. The myths long ago replaced the men. Like favorite fairy tales that children beg to hear again and again, they give us portraits as we want them to be, familiar, comfortable, and unchallenging. Some are hardly flattering. Grant the butcher, grant the drunkard, grant the corrupt. Yet there is also grant the magnanimous, grant the peacemaker. Leigh has fared better in mythology, even at the hands of his one-time enemies. Myths about him from his own time have now mostly disappeared. Leigh the woman whipper, replaced by the Leigh who never called the enemy the enemy. Leigh the champion of reconciliation. For more than a century, our eyes have teared at the oft-told tale of him when president of Washington College after the war, threatening an instructor with dismissal if he spoke again disparagingly of General Grant, the great Confederate chieftain, still gallant in defeat, demanding respect for a noble and magnanimous victor. Yet almost certainly the story is just that, a myth. The mythology serves purposes darker than sentiment, nothing more so than the currently popular and errantly nonsensical assertion that Leigh freed his inherited slaves in 1862 before the war was over, while Grant kept his until the 13th Amendment freed them in 1865. The subtext is transparent. If Southerner Leigh freed his slaves, while Northerner Grant kept his, then secession and the war that followed can hardly have had anything to do with slavery, and must instead have been over the tariff or state rights or some other handy pretext invented to cloak slavery's pivotal role. Losing a war is hard on the loser, but even more so when defeated while protecting an institution that Western culture has come to condemn unanimously. After decades of civil rights agitation in America have resulted in a vastly changed complexion to American society, an understandably defensive posture among many in the once Confederate states welcomes anything showing Yankees like Grant to be venal hypocrites, while Southerners like Leigh were really committed to ending slavery. It is a powerful palliative to those displeased with the social realities of the present. In this instance, of course, the reality is that Leigh probably never owned any slaves after 1848, and those he freed in December 1862 never belonged to him in the first place. They were the property of his late father-in-law, who provided for their freedom in his will and made Leigh his executor. In fact, Leigh originally hoped to hold them longer than the will dictated to enhance inheritances that went to his own children. As for Grant, he only ever owned one slave, and that for just a year, and freed him in 1859, even when the failed Grant himself was virtually bankrupt and sorely needed the $1,000 or more the man might have brought him at auction. There were occasionally one or two slaves with his wife and family in the early war years, when his wife joined him with the army in a slave state, but they belonged to her father, who loaned them to her, and were all freed by state action nearly a year before ratification of the 13th Amendment. In short, the slaves that Leigh did free never belonged to him. The slaves that Grant supposedly failed to free were never his to free. To earlier generations, they were the greatest heroes of their time, deservedly the most popular and, if they wished it, influential men in their sections. The country needed both of them after the war and into the century beyond. The South needed Leigh, the unbeatable, the very image of the cavalier warrior, as a focus for pride transcending defeat. Around him they could build a soul-sustaining ethos as they developed the mantra that the Confederacy was never really vanquished. It just wore itself out, whipping the Yankees. The South also needed Grant, and a certain kind of Grant, too, a soulless, mechanistic disciple of numbers, served slavishly by acolytes and